Hi everybody, welcome back. Today we're going to be discussing the appendicular skeleton, in particular the bones of the elbow joint. So before we do that, we have to get rid of a little bit of vocabulary here. I wanted to talk about the word fossa. So fossa is an indentation on a bone. So for example, if we take a look at this bone right here, this is actually the scapula. The scapula has a little indentation on it where it articulates with the humerus. This is called the glenoid fossa, and the fossa is this sort of smooth, indented area. So we're going to see fossa quite a bit. We're also going to need to know what a process is. Now, we've already learned about processes when we learned about the vertebral column. Remember, the spinous process is a piece of bone that sticks out, and the transverse processes stick out to the sides. So a process is simply a piece of bone that sticks out. The next thing on my list is a condyle. A condyle is also a piece of bone that's going to stick out or project away. But in general, a condyle is going to articulate with another bone. So an example of a condyle would be right here with the femur. This is the distal end of the femur, and you can see these two smooth, large, they almost look like knuckles sticking out here. They are going to articulate with the tibia. So these are the two condyles of the femur. We differentiate the two condyles by talking about whether they're the medial condyle or the lateral condyle. And remember, medial means towards the middle of the body, towards the midline. Lateral means further away. So when you look at the femur, as long as you know which side is the medial side and the lateral side, you know which is the medial condyle and the lateral condyle. On your lab practical list, we also have some markings called epicondyles. And epi means above. So the epicondyle is going to be a little projection of bone that's above the condyle. So if I told you this was the medial condyle, this would be the medial epicondyle. And if this part was the lateral condyle, then this sort of bump right above it is going to be the lateral epicondyle. The epicondyle is a rough projection of bone above the condyle where muscles attach. You can see epicondyles on the humerus and the femur. So we're going to take a closer look at the two bones that make up the hinge joint in the arm. The first one is the humerus. And the humerus has, you can tell it's a humerus because it has this sort of smooth ball at the top that's going to articulate with the glenoid fossa of the scapula. And this is going to make up part of your shoulder joint. And then at the bottom here, it's got a bunch of different bumps and markings that we're going to go through. It's pretty obvious that it's not femur. I don't know why people confuse the humerus and the femur. This is a femur. You see how the ball is so much further away from the bone? It's actually away at an angle. And then the other end, the distal end, has these massive condyles that articulate with the tibia. So it's really quite different looking than the humerus. The other bone here is the ulna, and you can tell it's an ulna because it actually has a notch on the proximal end, and that notch is in the shape of a U, so U is for ulna. Now when these two articulate, they're going to make that elbow joint that we think of. So imagine your arm being bent, here's the humerus, here's the ulna, and as you bend your arm back and forth, you have this sort of funny bone that sticks out that really hurts if you hit it. So a couple of markings here. This hourglass shaped marking on the humerus in black is called the trochlea. And that U notch that we were talking about, that's the trochlear notch. So since they have a very similar name, they're going to sit together. And that is actually, that trochlea is the track that this notch goes through as you bend and extend, flex and extend your elbow. So trochlea is the hourglass shaped part on the humerus, and the trochlear notch is that U notch on the ulna. Now on the back side, so the posterior side of the arm, is the funny bone. The funny bone is actually this process right here that we call the olecranon process. So olecranon process is actually the fancy name for your funny bone. And since we have a process, when we extend the arm, that process has to go somewhere. If this was solid bone, you wouldn't be able to extend your arm very far. So this fossa, this little indentation, is called the olecranon fossa. So if you can remember, olecranon, that's the process, and the fossa accepts that process when you extend your arm and your elbow is extended and straight. Trochlear notch, trochlea go together. Olecranon process and olecranon fossa go together. There's also a process at the other end of the U, so the short end of the U. That process is on the anterior side, and that's called the coranoid process. And when you bend your arm, we need a little fossa for it to go into. So that little fossa is called the coranoid fossa. So again, if you can remember trochlear, olecranon, coranoid, and just know whether it's a fossa or a process, you're pretty good. The other marking that you might notice here is this little ball that's got a little bit of blue color in it. That marking is actually called the capitulum. And the capitulum articulates with the radius. The radius has a perfectly round head on it, and that round head is going to articulate with the capitulum. So when you turn your hand over, what's actually happening is that radius is rotating back and forth like this. If you look at the end, as the radius, sorry, I got it backwards here. As the radius rotates, it's going to move your hand back and forth from supination to pronation. These are actually the condyles of the humerus. So even though we talk about the condyles on other bones that articulate, so like the condyles on the femur, you have the medial and the lateral. On the humerus, we give them special names. So this would be the medial condyle, but that's actually the trochlea. And this would be the lateral condyle, but that's the capitulum. So the epicondyles, remember epi means above, the epicondyles are going to be just above. This is going to be the lateral epicondyle, and this is going to be the medial epicondyle.